let's continue covering the fascinating, adventurous sagas of New France.
Montreal Governor Perrot was a prisoner in the chateau at Quebec, with guards placed over him by day and night. He had resisted the royal authority and insulted its representative, the Governor-General, Count Frontenac. Other results also followed, if we may believe the enemies of Frontenac, who declare that, by means of the new commandant and other persons in his interest, the Governor-General possessed himself of a great part of the trade from which he had ejected Perrot, and that the coureur de bois whom he hanged when breaking laws for his rival, found complete impunity when breaking laws for him. Meanwhile, there was a deep though subdued excitement among the priests of Saint-Sulpice. The right of naming their own governor, which they claimed as seigneurs of Montreal, had been violated by the action of Frontenac, in placing Lanuguère in command without consulting them. Perrot was a bad governor, but it was they who had chosen him, and the recollection of his misdeeds did not reconcile them to a successor arbitrarily imposed upon them. Both they and the colonists, their vassals, were intensely jealous of Quebec, and in their indignation against Frontenac, they more than half forgave Perrot. None among them all was so angry as the Abbé Fenelon. He believed that he had been used to lure Perrot into a trap, and his past attachment to the Governor-General was turned into wrath. High words had passed between them, and when Fenelon returned to Montreal, he vented his feelings in a sermon plainly levelled at Frontenac. So sharp and bitter was it that his brethren of Saint-Sulpice hastened to disclaim it, and Delier de Casson, their superior, strongly reproved the preacher, who protested in return that his words were not meant to apply to Frontenac in particular, but only to bad rulers in general. His offences, however, did not cease with the sermon, for he espoused the cause of Perrot with more than zeal, and went about among the colonists to collect attestations in his favour. When these things were reported to Frontenac, his ire was kindled, and he summoned Fenelon before the council at Quebec to answer the charge of instigating sedition. Fenelon had a relative and friend in the person of the Abbé d'Urfé, his co-partner in the work of the missions. D'Urfé, anxious to conjure down the rising storm, went to Quebec to seek an interview with Frontenac, but according to his own account, he was very ill received and threatened with a prison. On another occasion, the Count showed him a letter in which D'Urfé was charged with having used abusive language concerning him. Warm words ensued, till Frontenac, grasping his cane, led the Abbé to the door and dismissed him, berating him from the top of the stairs in tones so angry that the sentinel below spread the report that he had turned his visitor out of doors. 2 offenders were now arraigned before the Council of Quebec. The first was Perrot, charged with disobeying the royal edicts and resisting the royal authority. The other was the Abbé Fenelon. The councillors were at this time united in the interest of Frontenac, who had the power of appointing and removing them. Perrot, in no way softened by a long captivity, challenged the Governor-General, who presided at the council board, as a party to the suit and his personal enemy, and took exception to several of the members as being connections of Lanuguère. Frontenac withdrew, and other councillors or judges were appointed provisionally, but these were challenged in turn by the prisoner on one pretext or another. The exceptions were overruled and the trial proceeded, though not without signs of doubt and hesitation on the part of some of the councillors. Meanwhile, other sessions were held for the trial of Fenelon, and a curious scene ensued. 5 councillors and the Deputy Attorney-General were seated at the board, with Frontenac as presiding judge, his hat on his head and his sword at his side, after the established custom. Fenelon, being led in, approached a vacant chair, and was about to seat himself with the rest, when Frontenac interposed, telling him that it was his duty to remain standing while answering the questions of the council. Fenelon at once placed himself in the chair, and replied that priests had the right to speak seated and with heads covered. "Yes," returned Frontenac, "when they are summoned as witnesses, but not when they are cited to answer charges of crime." "My crimes exist nowhere but in your head," replied the Abbé. And putting on his hat, he drew it down over his brows, rose, gathered his cassock about him, and walked in a defiant manner to and fro. Frontenac told him that his conduct was wanting in respect to the council and to the governor as its head. Fenelon several times took off his hat and pushed it on again more angrily than ever, saying at the same time that Frontenac was wanting in respect to his character of priest, in setting him before a civil tribunal. As he persisted in his refusal to take the required attitude, he was at length told that he might leave the room. After being kept for a time in the anteroom in charge of a constable, he was again brought before the council, when he still refused obedience, and was ordered into a sort of honourable imprisonment, This behavior of the effervescent abbé, which Frontenac justly enough characterized as unworthy of his birth and his sacred office, was, nevertheless, founded on a claim sustained by many precedents. As an ecclesiastic, Fenelon insisted that the bishop alone, and not the council, had the right to judge him. Like Perrot, too, he challenged his judges as parties to the suit or otherwise interested against him. On the question of jurisdiction, he had all the priests on his side. Bishop Laval was in France, and Bernière, his grand vicar, was far from filling the place of the strenuous and determined prelate. Yet the ecclesiastical storm rose so high that the councillors, discouraged and daunted, were no longer amenable to the will of Frontenac, and it was resolved at last to refer the whole matter to the king. Perrot was taken from the prison which he had occupied from January to November and shipped for France along with Fenelon. An immense mass of papers was sent with them for the instruction of the king, and Frontenac wrote a long despatch in which he sets forth the offences of Perrot and Fenelon, the pretensions of the ecclesiastics, the calumnies he had incurred in his efforts to serve his majesty, and the insults heaped upon him, which no man but me would have endured so patiently. Indeed, while the suits were pending before the council, he had displayed a calmness and moderation which surprised his opponents. "Knowing as I do," he pursues, "the cabals and intrigues that are rife here, I must expect that everything will be said against me that the most artful slander can devise. A governor in this country would greatly deserve pity if he were left without support. And even should he make mistakes, seeing that there is no snare that is not spread for him, and that after avoiding 100 of them, he will hardly escape being caught at last." In his charges of cabal and intrigue, Frontenac had chiefly in view the clergy, whom he profoundly distrusted, excepting always the Récollet friars, whom he befriended because the bishop and the Jesuits opposed them. The priests, on their part, declared that he persecuted them, compelled them to take passports like laymen when traveling about the colony, and even intercepted their letters. These accusations and many others were carried to the king and the minister by the Abbé d'Urfé, who sailed in the same ship with Fenelon. The moment was singularly auspicious to him. His cousin the Marquise d'Allègre was on the point of marrying Seigneuret, the son of the minister Colbert, who therefore was naturally inclined to listen with favor to him and to Fenelon, his relative. Again, Talon, uncle of Perrot's wife, held a post at court, which brought him into close personal relations with the king. Nor were these the only influences adverse to Frontenac and propitious to his enemies. Yet his enemies were disappointed. The letters written to him both by Colbert and by the king are admirable for calmness and dignity. The following is from that of the king. "Though I do not credit all that has been told me concerning various little annoyances which you caused to the ecclesiastics, I nevertheless think it necessary to inform you of it, in order that, if true, you may correct yourself in this particular, giving to all the clergy entire liberty to go and come throughout all Canada, without compelling them to take out passports, and at the same time leaving them perfect freedom as regards their letters. I have seen and carefully examined all that you have sent touching Monsieur Perrot, and after having also seen all the papers given by him in his defense, I have condemned his action in imprisoning an officer of your guard. To punish him, I have had him placed for a short time in the Bastille, that he may learn to be more circumspect in the discharge of his duty, and that his example may serve as a warning to others. But after having thus vindicated my authority, which has been violated in your person, I will say, in order that you may fully understand my views, that you should not, without absolute necessity, cause your commands to be executed within the limits of a local government, like that of Montreal, without first informing its governor, and also that the 10 months of imprisonment which you have made him undergo seems to me sufficient for his fault. I therefore sent him to the Bastille merely as a public reparation for having violated my authority. After keeping him there a few days, I shall send him back to his government, ordering him first to see you and make apology to you for all that has passed, after which I desire that you retain no resentment against him, and that you treat him in accordance with the powers that I have given him." Colbert writes in terms equally measured, and adds, "After having spoken in the name of His Majesty, pray let me add a word in my own. By the marriage which the king has been pleased to make between the heiress of the house of Allègre and my son, the Abbé d'Urfé has become very closely connected with me, since he is cousin german of my daughter-in-law, and this induces me to request you to show him especial consideration, though, in the exercise of his profession, he will rarely have occasion to see you. As D'Urfé had lately addressed a memorial to Colbert in which the conduct of Frontenac is painted in the darkest colors, the almost imperceptible rebuke couched in the above lines does no little credit to the tact and moderation of the stern minister. Colbert next begs Frontenac to treat with kindness the priest of Montreal, observing that Bretonvilliers, their superior at Paris, is his particular friend. As to M. Perrot, he continues, since 10 months of imprisonment at Quebec and 3 weeks in the Bastille may suffice to atone for his fault, and since also he is related or connected with persons for whom I have a great regard, I pray you to accept kindly the apologies which he will make you, and as it is not at all likely that he will fall again into any offense approaching that which he has committed, you will give me a special pleasure in granting him the honor of your favor and friendship. Fenelon, though the recent marriage had allied him also to Colbert, fared worse than either of the other parties to the dispute. He was indeed sustained in his claim to be judged by an ecclesiastical tribunal, but his superior, Bretonvilliers, forbade him to return to Canada, and the king approved the prohibition. Bretonvilliers wrote to the Sulpician priests of Montreal, "I exhort you to profit by the example of Monsieur de Fenelon. By having busied himself too much in worldly matters and meddled with what did not concern him, he has ruined his own prospects and injured the friends whom he wished to serve. In matters of this sort it is well always to stand neutral."